This is going to feel really good for me to get back into some configuration. While TCP/IP subnetting is awesome, coming out of that, I feel like I'm ready to just get back in and start setting up some Cisco devices. We're going to make a nice transition now into the world of routing. We started the series off with network foundations. We moved into the switching realm and local area networks and how to deal with those and set those up. And then we took a hiatus into the advanced TCP/IP as we talked about subnetting and breaking networks into groups. Now it's time to turn our attention to the device that made Cisco the company they are, their routers. Cisco did invent the router. Not many people know that, but they were the first to mass produce a router and allow people to buy them for production networks and so on. So that's the device that we're going to spend the rest of our time in this series on, routing. So initially what I'd like to do is walk through the same kind of feel that we did with the switch. I want to give you a view of the physical interfaces and the physical indicators of a router. They're not as pretty as the switch, and you don't have buttons that change lights, but at least you'll know what the interfaces and what routers look like. We'll then walk through the boot process and watch a router power on and work through its boot process. Then we'll perform the initial configuration of a router, including some of the security settings, setting passwords on the VTY lines and telnet sessions, logon banners, IP addresses, all of those sorts of things we'll walk through step by step. So let's take a look at the router physically speaking. Routers come in all sorts of shapes and sizes. I mean, there are some routers that probably would consume an entire room, a decent room of a house if you let them. They're just massive and enormous. But what I did was put some pictures of just some typical routers that we'll be working with in the businesses that we deal with day to day. Now, at the very top, I have my favorite router as of right now. Well, Cisco came out with this one about a year or two ago, maybe 3. It is the Cisco 800 series router, and the 851 and 871 is what I'm primarily dealing with. If you're looking for a great lab router to use in your own home or just something to play around with to get familiar with the iOS and work with, I'd highly recommend getting one of these guys. The 851 is the older one, but it does just about everything that most people want from a router. It does, VPN connections, it does routing, it does routing protocols, everything that you need, at least for the CCNA and CCNP tracks, that thing does. And it's very low cost. It even does wireless. Man, I feel like a salesman. What a deal. But I'm telling you, it's a great starting router. It works in like a small business shop, even home offices, things like that. That's the market it's geared for. Below that is their mainstream routers, the 2800 series. This is what you'll find in a lot of medium to large businesses, a lot of these types of routers, and you can move up to the 3800 and 7000 series. I mean, there's a lot of series of routers. But the beauty is they all run the same iOS. And that's why I highly recommend these guys for lab equipment, is because you can learn it on one of these 851s and toy around with it, and then walk into a business network that's running one of these guys, or even bigger, and still have the same look and feel. It's just like Windows, but it runs much faster, of course. On the higher end equipment, you can have a lot more interfaces. So I brought in a zoomed in view of the router so that we can take a look and just get familiar with the main interfaces. You can see over here, start with the left. Well, I didn't mark it, but that is actually I missed. This is a USB port. They actually have USB ports on their routers. They're used for a variety of things, primarily to put encryption keys on there, but you can actually even plug in a USB key and use that as the flash on your router to store different iOS images and stuff. It's pretty cool. Next to that, you see the yellow. They're kind of yellowy interfaces. Those are the fast Ethernet interfaces of this router. Now, different routers have different fast Ethernet interfaces. Some may just have one. Others may have 4 different fast Ethernet interfaces. It all depends on the router that you have. This might connect to one network up here, maybe the internet. And this might, down here, connect to another network like your private LAN. And this routes between the internet and your private network. Now, of course, as you get into businesses that are much bigger than just a typical small office, home office environment, you'll start moving into these kinds of interfaces like T1s. These are pure T1 ports where you can just take a direct feed from the service provider and have a T1 line that maybe is a private WAN link between your offices. You could have a T1 line to the internet. I'm not going to go there. You can have T1s to many, many different things. But that's a T1 interface that can connect you up. And also, while I'm talking about this, want to mention this guy. This is known as a WIC card, a WAN interface card. I guess WIC card is a little redundant, but this is what one of these cards looks like. All of these cards that you see right here are interchangeable. That's the beauty of modular routers. Is I can, if I don't need these interfaces, I can take them out and slide in a WIC card or whatever card meets the needs for what I have. This is a very common one. It's called a WIC1T, and that is a serial interface. A lot of people will immediately recognize and go, oh, that's a serial port, and that can connect to many different network types. At the very end of this series, we'll talk about WAN technologies, and I'll get into things like frame relay and straight serial connections and so on. But that's another style of interface that you'll have. Now, one of the newer interfaces that Cisco's come out with are switch ports. They started realizing, hey, you know what? A lot of people are running these routers in small offices, and they just want like an all-in-one device, meaning they want a switch and a router all in one. And that's what these interfaces are. They're just switch ports. You can have a little blade right here of 4 different switch ports where you can attach PCs. So take all the knowledge that you gained earlier in the series on how switches work and now apply it to the router, because these routers can have switches as well. As a matter of fact, not to sell you one of these, but I'm probably going to. The Cisco 851 and 871 has a built-in switch too. I actually have one sitting right next to me. That's what we're going to use to work through a lot of the demos that I have coming up. But this guy has a built-in 4-port switch and a single interface that connects to the WAN. I should have had a picture of this. That'd be great. But on the back of this, we've got 4 individual ports that acts as a switch where you can plug in your different computers to, and then a separate Ethernet interface that connects up to the internet. So you can route between the internet and your private network, and then way over here on the side, it's got a little, looks like a coax connector, but it's meant to attach a wireless antenna to, where you can, get some wireless action going on and have people joining in your network. That is a sad and homely looking router right there, but the real one on the back looks much cleaner. Man, I can tell I'm really excited because I feel like I'm talking really fast because I'm really excited to get here. Okay, I'll slow down. What I want to do is I want to show you the initial router boot process and walk through the configuration so you can actually watch a router boot up and get set up. It's very similar to the switch, but you might notice some differences. So I just powered on. Sitting next to me, I've got, this is a Cisco 851 router. And we can watch it go through the boot process. So the first thing it says, copyright information, yada, yada. This has 64 megabytes or 65,000 kilobytes of main memory. It shows it in kilobytes. Remember, a meg is just 1064K, or 1024K, sorry. So if you want to figure out how many megs that is, just take 65,536 and divide it by 1024. I'm sorry. I'm sitting there watching this. I'm like, what else can I come up with during this slow boot process? And then I just realized I stepped on the power supply, and it's one of those power supplies that has the connector in the middle, and I just totally split the connector in half. Not breaking it, but it just pulled out. So, okay, I plugged it back in, and I was thinking, man, this is a slow router. All right, there we go. So it shows right now booting the flash. Inside of the flash memory, it's got an iOS, and that's what it's booting up right now. This shows the version. It's iOS for the 800 series. Right there, it's 12.3 release 8 of the advanced security feature set. Gives some cryptographic information saying you can't send this outside of the United States or to countries that restrict encryption and so on, so they can monitor what you're doing. Down here I see that this has 5 Ethernet interfaces, one 802.11, that's a wireless radio. It has 128K of NVRAM, or configuration memory, and 20 megs of flash that it's using to store the iOS. So now it's asking, do you want to enter the initial config dialog? As I mentioned on the switch, once you get familiar with the router, you'll never use this thing, never use the config dialog. But just so we can see it and feel comfortable, I'll type in yes, and it says, would you like to enter basic management setup? Now again, basic management just sets up the router same way as the switch, with just enough information so I can telnet in remotely. It's very good if you're wanting to get out of that frigid IT room and go back to your comfortable desk and telnet into the device and finish the setup there. So I'll say no. Let's take a look at the whole thing. Do you want to see the interface summary? Sure, I'll hit enter. It says here are your interfaces. I see .11 radio 0, fast Ethernet 0, 1, 2, and I can see all the different interfaces that I have. Now it comes up and says enter the host name. What do you want to configure as the name of this router? And I'll say CBT router. Enter. What is your enable secret? You having some flashbacks right now? I'll put password. What is the enable password? Excuse me. Cisco. Now remember, the enable secret and the enable password, one is clear text, one is encrypted. Down here it's asking, do you want to go through and set up your VTY passwords? And so on and so on. I just want to give you a view of what this looks like. I don't want to go through the entire configuration in this because chances are you won't use it. So I'm going to break out of that and do Control C. It says configuration is aborted, no changes were made. So at this point, what I'm going to do is it's going to drop me out, press return to get started, into user mode. Should come up in just a moment. I'm really not standing on the power supply this time. Hit enter. I'm sitting in user mode, get past those status messages. Same look, same feel as the switch. I can do a question mark to find out what I can type in. I know that I need to get to privilege mode, so EN tab will finish the command. Hit enter, or I could just use the shortcut. In privilege mode, I can do the show commands, some of the copy running config, startup config to save my config, those kinds of things. Or I can move into global configuration and start making my configuration changes. So I want to walk through, again, the same basic feel that we did with the switch and start off with the host name. I'll type in hostname CBT router. Immediately my prompt changes over to CBT router. Let's set a logon banner. I'll say banner. Do you remember these commands? Banner MOTD. That's my message of the day. And I'll hit space and it says type in your line C banner text C. This is where I get to pick a character and I'll use the @ symbol. Enter. So I'll say star, 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 star. This is a secure router. Unauthorized logins are restricted. And I hit an enter key right there. Period. No need for a long logon banner, or else it starts taking a long time to save your config. Get some stars. You don't even need the stars. It looks cool when you log on, kind of separates it from everything else. And then I end my message by using the @ symbol. So right there, @ symbol and enter, and I have now saved my logon banner. Now, I can start configuring the console port. I'll type in line console 0. Which is my console port, and I'll say login to require logins. It says logins will be disabled until you set a password. By the way, this is kind of a dangerous place to be because if you exit out, your console port will actually be disabled unless you do some sort of password recovery or something. So you better set a password if you type in login. So I'll type in password Cisco to require the password of Cisco. I'll also type in that shortcut command, logging synchronous. That was the one that kept the status message. You remember the optimizing the switch video where I said logging synchronous will keep the status messages from interrupting what you're typing. So when I exit out and start typing here, if I get a message, it will repaint what I'm typing below that message instead of keeping me typing right here. I'll also, while I'm on the console port, I'll go back under there, line console 0, I'll type in exec timeout. And I'll say the timeout in minutes, by default, is 5 or 10 minutes, depending on a device that you're on. I'll set the timeout for 30 minutes because I like being able to let it sit there for a little while before I'm just booted off the console port and I have to re-log in again. Now that I'm here, I've got the console port configured. Let's also get under line VTY. 0 space and do a question mark. See, this device, this router right here, only supports 4 VTY ports, or I guess a total of 5, 0 through 4. So I'll type in 4 as my endpoint, type in login to require logins. It says they're all disabled until you set a password. That's fine. I'll say password Cisco so that I'll require that password when people telnet into my switch. And I'll also type in logging synchronous under my telnet ports as well. So that way if they get passwords, what am I talking about? If they get messages when they're telnetted into my router, it will look pretty for them as well, so it doesn't mess them up. This is on a per port basis, so I'll say it for my telnet ports, and I'll even do the exact timeout. I'll make it 20 minutes on the VTY ports. No need for the seconds. I'll hit enter there. Good. So I've got the console port configured. I've got the lines, the VTY lines configured. Now let's make sure that we set our enable secret. Remember, the command is enable secret, and then we type in what we want our password to be. I'll type in Cisco. Every password on my device right now is Cisco, which is horrible for security, but great for lab environments. And I would say at this point, we are pretty much secured, at least with passwords, so that I now have the password set up. Good. Now, to get familiar with a router, I think I mentioned this in the switch, my all-time favorite command in all Cisco is show IP interface brief. That will give you a view of all the interfaces that you have on your router. Now I can see fast Ethernet 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. That's on my router. I see my .11 radio down there, which is my wireless, if I want to get that set up. We won't do that in this series. That's for the I don't even know what series that's in. That's in the wireless videos. They have a whole separate section on setting up wireless, a whole separate certification, I should say, for setting up wireless in Cisco. And then we have this VLAN 1 interface. Now, let me reveal this to you. Poof. This is my network diagram that we're going to stick with for a couple videos. What we have is behind this router is a switch. And behind this switch is a PC that's attached. Now this router is going to be the core of our network, meaning it's going to be, we have people plugging into the switch, but it's going to be the device that routes between the internet and our internal network. And we're going to set this up layer by layer. The first thing that I'm going to do is start configuring the IP addresses on this switch. Now, right here you can see our network diagram. On the private side, private network side, my local area network, I have the IP address that I'd like to set up, which is 192.168.1.1/24. On the public side, we'll put this as the public network, the internet service provider has given me an IP address. It's a static address, 68.110.171.98. Now you notice I've started to write my subnet masks with slash notation or bit notation. It's a little quicker shorthand, and we'll be using that a lot throughout the rest of the series. /24 over there is our class C. /27 is a subnetted address, 255.255.255.224 is that in decimal form. So that's going to be my configuration. Now, coming back here, I can see I have all these interfaces. So which one do I use? Now, the 800 series router is a little bit different than some of the big routers, the main production routers. Typically, if you're using one of the bigger routers, like we'll say a 2800 series, you'll have two fast Ethernet ports. You'll typically have one that's like fast Ethernet 0/0 because it's modular where you can slide modules in and out. And then you'll have fast Ethernet 0/1. The 0 stands for module 0. The 1 stands for port 1, and this is port 0. They don't usually have so many fast Ethernet ports like I do on this 800 series because they assume in a larger environment where we have our like 2800 series or a larger router, you would have a switch behind there that you plug all your clients into, maybe 24 or 48 port switch where you have a bunch of clients attached. But this router, the 800 series, is designed for a small office or a home office network where they assume maybe you've got 2 or 3 computers, and this comes with a built-in switch. Now, I'm looking at the back of this 800 series. You know what? Let me pause this video because I want to see if I can find a picture. If not, I'm just going to grab my camera right here. I'm going to take one so that you can see the back of this 800 series router. Here we go. I found one. This is the 851 router that we're using right now. You can see the front, just got some pretty lights, and that's about it. On the back of it, you can see that we have kind of a group of 4 yellow interfaces. One, oh, man, let me move my, oh, geez, can't do that. Let me get a new layer here. So I've got this group of 4 interfaces. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 physical interfaces. And then we've got this yellow interface right here. I'm not too sure if you can see my black pen. This guy, that's better, that's kind of separated from the rest. And then over here is a blue port. Without seeing the labels on there up close, what it says, and I'm reading off of mine, over on this side, it shows FE0. They abbreviate Fast Ethernet, F Fast Ethernet on here. This one says FE1, 2, 3, and then this one is uniquely separated from the group, and it says FE4. Let me drop down, and then next, above that, you can see you've got kind of writing on the bottom and top, if you've got really good spectacles, it says WAN right above it, kind of designating that one as separate. So when I look at the configuration here, and get that brought up, and I see that, I can see that I have identifiers for every single one of those interfaces, Fast Ethernet 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, where this one is designated as my WAN. So what I want to do first off is get under interface Fast Ethernet 4. That's just the interface name. And I'm going to put a description. Description, Internet WAN port, because that one is separate. Now, the way they decided to set up all of the interfaces for the 800 series is they said all of these, 0, 1, 2, and 3, are kind of like a switch, meaning they're all configured as a switch would be. So remember on our switches, we had that one logical interface that we would set up for management purposes called VLAN 1. Well, on the 800 series switch, or router, switch, router, both things, the 800 series router, these are all considered one switch, and VLAN 1 is the logical interface that they all belong to. Meaning that if I configure an IP address on VLAN 1, the devices that are plugged into all 4 of those switch ports will be able to reach that IP address. Now you can see up here on this diagram, my logical configuration for my router is the internal interface has 192.168.1.1, and my public interface has this IP address. So with that in mind, I would assign this internal interface to the logical VLAN 1. Now, on a bigger router, you may actually assign that internal interface to a physical interface, like Fast Ethernet 0/0. On this smaller router, with the built-in switch, you'll assign it to VLAN 1. So it's good to be familiar with both. I'll show you some of the bigger routers a little bit later when we get into the more complex routing and routing protocols that we'll be setting up. So to set this up, I'm right now under my internet port. So while we're here, let's do some good. I'm going to type in IP address. Let me jump back here. It's 68.110.171.98. Let's pop it up. 68.110.171.98. Just verify that. 171.98/27. So, unfortunately, the iOS won't let us use slash notation, at least not yet. Someday down the road it may. I'll put in 255.255 and the /27 is 224 in decimal. I do space question mark. It says, do you want this to be a secondary address, like you have more than one assigned to the interface? I'll say no. I'll just hit the enter key and take that. Now, I notice that Fast Ethernet 4, the status right here is administratively down. And that means I need to type in no shutdown. Enter. Now I should see some status messages. I just saw the lights on my router light up. It shows that I have a link. And I see the status message saying it has been changed to up, and then it says line protocol. Line protocol on interface Ethernet, Fast Ethernet 4 is changed to up. So if I hit Control Z, jump back to privilege mode and type in show IP interface brief, you can see that both layer 1, that's the first message up here, physically has gone up, and the line protocol, meaning the data link layer, has gone up. I also see that I now have my internet valid address assigned to that interface. Now, while we're talking about IP addresses, my service provider allows me to have a static public address, but that's just because I pay them a large sum of money more every single month because I have static addresses that run to my office. But in your case, a lot of the high-speed internet providers won't allow you to have a static address unless you pay them a bundle more. So you may have a DHCP assigned address, meaning, and before I get to the config, the ISP will let you borrow an address as long as your router's online, but if you turn it off, you have to give it back. Essentially, that's DHCP. You're assigned dynamically. So if you have one of those service providers, I'll get under Interface Fast Ethernet 4, hit Enter. You would type in IP address, I'll hit the question mark, and you can see DHCP. So it will actually accept a DHCP assigned address rather than me typing in a manual address like I just did. So we've got one of those interfaces configured. Let's do the other one. All of these interfaces right here, first off, Fast Ethernet 0 through 3 are shut down. So I'm going to type in, let's see if this router lets us use the interface range command. Oh, sweet, they do. I'm going to type in interface range Fast Ethernet, and I'll just do 1 through 3. Enter. So what I'm doing is configuring all, whoops, I meant interface range 0 through 3. I forgot about the initial one. I'm configuring all 4 of those switch ports at the same time, and I'm going to turn them all on with a harmonious no shutdown. I hit enter. Control Z, and I type in show IP interface brief one more time, and I can see that currently they are all up, right here, up, and the line protocol is down. Now the reason that's happening is because I've powered them on. I've said, okay, you are now allowed to turn on, but as of yet, I don't have anything attached to those ports. So it's saying, yes, I'm physically okay, but I'm not getting any data link signal. I'm not getting any electricity, if you will, coming over that line. Once we plug in a PC or run a crossover cable, just like my diagram shows, from the back of this router to the switch. Now, we need to use a crossover cable because those are now switch ports rather than router ports that are built into the switch. So those are all set up. Now, I need to go under the logical interface. Interface VLAN 1, and I'm going to give it the IP address 192.168.1.1/24 with 255.255.50 subnet mask. So now I've assigned the IP address to both the public and private interface. I'll come back and verify my configuration by typing in show IP interface brief. There's the public, there's the private. This router is now initially configured. You can say that this is ready to go on to the next step. I'm just going to type in one more command, and that's show interface Fast Ethernet 4, just to show you the output from this. In here, I'm able to see the description of my one running interface right now. It is the Internet WAN port. Here's the IP address, and notice it converted my decimal subnet mask I typed in to the bit notation because it recognizes that. Down there, it shows that so far, not too much action has happened. It's received 17 broadcasts, and that's about it. Since there's no routing happening yet, there's no clients attached, there's not going to be too much action coming from the internet because nobody's making any internet requests. All right, that's good for the initial introductory video to routing. What we did was first off look at the router physically, understand the physical interfaces. We looked at an 800 series router, 851 to be exact, and we looked at the 2800 series. But I'd encourage you, if you'd like, to go out to the Cisco website and, well, let me show you real quick. I know it's a summary slide, but it'd be still kind of neat to see. I'm going to take you to www.cisco.com. And right in here, you can go to their products and services and shoot over to routing and routing systems. Underneath there, you'll be able to see every major series of router that Cisco creates. Down here is our little 800 series. I love that guy. He's so cute. Little 2 antennas popping up and all that. You got the 1800 series, which is kind of the next step up. It's typically used as a voice router, but besides that, it actually works very well in mini network environments, smaller. 2800 is their first mainline kind of mother router, if you will, for mainstream, medium, large businesses. 3800 series is mainly geared for the larger and enterprise. Once you move up here, you move into the 7000 and 6500 series, which is geared for enterprise and service provider networks. So you can actually click through those and take a look. You know, if you click on one of them, you'll be able to get a good view of the picture and be able to see what each one of those looks like. And they have data sheets. Well, you'll be able to see the back of them. They even, look at this guy. Look at them. They've even got video data sheets where you can click on play and watch this guy explain to you through a long loading process exactly what those interfaces look like. And you kind of, oh, sorry, I got to stop. I got to stop that guy. He's coming through my ears right now. But he'll actually explain to you, flip the router around and show you how the modules slide in and out. So, pretty cool way to get an introductory view of what each one of those routers are. I was summing up. So that's the physical side of things, the initial setup. All right, we also went through and observed the boot process. When you step on the plug, we saw what it looks like, and when you leave the plug connected. Finally, we saw the initial configuration, which is almost identical to the switch, walking through securing the telnet ports, the enable secret, the interfaces and what IP addresses they have, and so on. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.